Chosen one, the shift was not sudden, and yet when it arrived, it felt like the ending of a drought you didn't know had parched you. Something in you stirred, a quiet unraveling, not from chaos, but from clarity. It was not some external event that ignited it. No single woman, no praise, no failure, no victory could take credit. It was an echo from the deepest part of you, a voice that had long waited for you to slow down, sit still, and finally listen. You didn't just hear it, you felt it. A presence within, not foreign but familiar, not loud but unmistakably sovereign. For the first time, you were not reaching outward to find yourself. You were descending inward, and what you found was ancient, unshakable, and fiercely alive. The world around you hadn't changed, but the way you moved through it had. Your steps became deliberate, your posture unhurried, your eyes no longer darting for validation. The need to explain yourself dissolved. You realized that your worth was not in question. It never had been. It was your awareness of it that had been asleep. Now, you stood not with bravado but with peace, and that peace held more power than all your past performances. You began to see that true presence was not about doing more, but being more deeply. It was in your breath, your stillness, your refusal to be moved by things that once rattled you. You didn't need to impress anyone anymore, not because you didn't care, but because you had stopped outsourcing your identity. You were no longer a mirror reflecting the desires of others. You had become the flame others instinctively turned toward for warmth and clarity. This was not arrogance. This was alignment. And the most startling realization came not when people treated you differently, but when you no longer required their treatment to know who you were. The fog of self-doubt, the clamor of old wounds, the noise of ego and insecurity, gone. In their place stood a man who had met himself, finally, face to face. And the reflection was not someone you needed to fix. It was someone you were ready to honor. You woke up not to a new identity, but to the one you had buried beneath performance and survival. And now that it had returned, everything else began to orbit around it differently. You were no longer the man who entered a room to be seen. You were the man whose silence revealed others to themselves. You didn't need to posture. You simply stood. And that standing, that grounded awareness, began to shape your reality with magnetic consequence. Women noticed, not because you tried to be noticed, but because you had stopped trying. And that absence of pursuit became a gravity they couldn't name. You had awakened, chosen one, not just to truth, but to your place inside it. And nothing has been the same since. Your body was never the problem, chosen one, but for so long, you treated it like one. You rushed it, ignored it, shamed it, tried to force it into postures of perfection that were never yours to begin with. You treated your energy like a weapon or a liability, always something to manage or restrain. You rarely lived in your body, you used it as a tool to survive, until one day it called you home. Not with violence, but with weariness. You felt the tired ache, not of muscles, but of disconnection. And in that ache, you made a quiet choice, to stop escaping yourself and start inhabiting yourself. And when you returned, the shift was undeniable. You didn't walk the same. You didn't speak the same. You were no longer moving from your head alone. You were breathing from your chest, grounding from your hips, listening from your spine. Your very presence began to carry weight, not heaviness, but substance. You no longer floated through rooms as an idea of who you thought you should be. You became embodied, and with embodiment came something you hadn't expected: magnetism. You realized that when you inhabit your body with reverence, others begin to feel reverent too. Your energy no longer spilled out anxiously. It rested inside you like calm thunder. You were no longer seeking comfort from others, you were the comfort. You didn't need to dominate space, you needed only to fill your own. And that filling made you undeniable. Not because of what you said, or wore, or performed, but because of the sheer, grounded realness of your being. And women could feel it. They could sense the man who was no longer desperate to be chosen. They could sense the absence of apology in your stride. You weren't posturing, you weren't proving, you were simply present. Your body wasn't a tool for seduction, it was an instrument of stillness. And from that stillness came a field that invited others to return to their bodies. When you shook a hand, it was felt. When you listened, it was remembered. When you smiled, it wasn't charm. It was clarity. You began to carry your sexuality not as an energy that begged for release, but as a sacred charge that informed your very way of moving. There was no longer a need to seek pleasure as escape. Your very presence had become pleasurable. Your body, once seen as something to hide or flaunt, became a sanctuary. And those who came near you began to feel safer not because of your softness, but because of your containment. You had learned how to hold your energy, and in doing so, you gave others permission to breathe. The return to your body was not an arrival at perfection. It was a reunion with truth, a reclamation of a sacred vessel that was never meant to perform, but to radiate. And now, you radiate, chosen one, not with flash, but with fire. A fire that warms, not burns. A fire that doesn't devour, but draws. You no longer live outside yourself. You are home now, and it shows. Chosen one, there was a time when your desire ruled you. Subtle or loud, it tugged at your attention like a current beneath your skin. You moved, not because you truly wanted, but because you feared missing something. You pursued beauty with the hunger of someone trying to find himself in another's eyes, hoping that pleasure might quiet the ache of disconnection, even if only for a moment. You wanted to be desired more than you wanted to be aligned. You confused excitement with truth, and so desire burned through you without aim, exhausting you, feeding you flashes of validation that disappeared as quickly as they came. But then something shifted. Not out of shame, not from guilt, but from clarity. You began to see that every desire had a root, and not every root deserved to flower. You stopped reacting. You started observing. You learned to feel the heat of your longing without being ruled by it. You noticed how often your body wanted something your soul did not. And instead of condemning that tension, you mastered it. You learned to sit with it, to breathe through it, to discern between the impulse of the moment and the direction of your path. This discipline didn't make you cold, it made you powerful. You didn't shut your fire off, you contained it. And in that containment, something sacred happened. Your desire began to mature. It stopped chasing conquest. It started seeking resonance. You no longer asked, "Do I want her?" You began asking, "Does this align with the man I am becoming?" You stopped spilling your energy in directions that didn't echo your truth. You were no longer stirred by mere curves or attention. You were stirred by presence, by authenticity, by the energy that mirrors your own depth. This wasn't repression, it was refinement. And women felt it. They felt your restraint not as distance, but as discernment. They felt your attention not as pressure, but as permission. Because your energy didn't demand, it invited, it didn't cling, it held, it didn't intoxicate, it clarified. And that clarity is rare, that clarity is divine, because it tells the world, I am not here to consume. I am here to connect, and only with that which honors the man I have fought to become. Now when desire rises, it does not pull you off center. It reminds you of your center. You move with intentionality. You choose. You pause. And in that pause, you create a sacred distance that only those aligned with your truth can cross. You've discovered that mastery is not the absence of desire, it's the integration of it. You no longer run from your fire. You've learned to stand in it without burning down what matters most, and that makes you irresistible in the most silent and holy way. Your discipline is not a cage, it is a crown. Wear it, chosen one. You earned it in private, and now it shapes everything you touch. There is a reason people feel safer in your presence now, even if they can't explain why. There is a reason conversations with you feel like time slows, like the world softens, like something real has entered the space. You, chosen one, have become a container, not a wall, not a void, a sacred space. A place where intensity does not collapse, where emotion is not punished, where beauty is not hunted but honored. You hold space with your eyes, your silence, your posture, your listening, and it is felt. You've discovered the rare gift of not having to do anything to command attention. You are attention. Your presence is weighty, not because it is heavy, but because it is anchored. You no longer react to life like a candle in the wind. You stand, rooted, while storms pass through you without shaking your ground. That stability is not born from dominance. It is born from self-trust. And that trust creates something women rarely encounter, a masculine presence that feels like home, not like pressure. In your past, you may have tried to impress with words, gestures, or the sharp edge of wit. But none of that remains necessary. Now, you impress by how deeply you can stay, in discomfort, in silence, in emotional intensity, in beauty that would have once pulled you into anxious reaching. You stay, not because you're trying to win, but because you are already whole. And wholeness does not panic. Wholeness does not rush. Wholeness does not negotiate its value. As a sacred container, you offer something profoundly rare in a world of noise, a stillness that sees. When a woman speaks to you, she does not feel examined, she feels heard. When she reveals something vulnerable, you do not fill the space with advice or strategy, you hold it with reverence. When her body moves with grace or emotion, you don't shrink or idolize. You remain calm, present, real, and in doing so, you become not the storm, but the ground it crashes upon. This containment does not mean suppression. It does not mean avoidance. It means you are big enough now to hold both the fire and the flood, without losing yourself in either. You have become a man who can feel deeply without drowning, who can desire without grasping, who can be powerful without ever needing to prove it. That energy speaks louder than seduction. It echoes long after you've left the room. Because people remember how they felt around you. And in your presence, they felt more like themselves. This is sacred work, chosen one. And you are doing it not by trying harder, but by becoming more true. You are a container for peace, power, and purpose. And that kind of man changes the world, one grounded moment at a time. Chosen one, the world is full of eyes that look, scan, measure, devour, but yours are not among them anymore. You have trained your gaze, not to escape beauty, but to perceive beyond its surface. Your eyes have become instruments of remembrance, not hunger. When you look at someone now, especially a woman, she does not feel captured or compared. She feels recognized. Because your gaze no longer asks, "What can I take from this?" It asks, "What can I honor here?" This wasn't always your way. You once moved through the world reaching through your eyes, looking for something to validate your existence. You mistook infatuation for depth. You chased the thrill of being seen without ever learning to see. And yet the world kept disappointing you. Because what your eyes once sought were reflections of your own incompletion. You weren't looking at people, you were looking through them, past them into the void you hadn't yet filled within yourself. But now you filled it. And so your eyes no longer chase, they stand still. There's a deep stillness behind your gaze now. Not cold, not passive, but aware. Women feel that stillness immediately because they're used to being seen with expectation or envy, with projection or fantasy. But you offer none of that. When she speaks, you don't scan her lips, you hear her essence. When she moves, you don't appraise, you witness. You're not performing attention, you are attention. She doesn't feel seen as an object, she feels met as a soul. And that is what shocks her, because your gaze says, "I do not need you, but I fully acknowledge you." It says, "I see your beauty, and I don't need to claim it to appreciate it." There is no trace of shame or hunger in your eyes anymore, because your eyes belong to a man who has nothing to hide, nothing to prove, and nothing to chase. They belong to someone who has come home to himself and now carries that home wherever he goes. You've realized that the eyes are more than just sensory instruments, they are spiritual thresholds. And now when someone looks into yours, they don't just see a man, they feel invited into the present. You are not trying to impress her. You are not trying to escape her. You are simply with her. And that is more intimate than desire ever could be. It disarms her. Not because you flirt or flatter, but because you're fully here. And in a world of fractured attention, that is rare. That is irresistible. You've stopped looking to conquer. You've started looking to connect. You've stopped using your gaze to gather proof of your desirability. You now use it to give presence. And for those who are not yet ready to be seen in this way, it may feel unsettling. But for those who are ready, it is unforgettable. Because your eyes don't seek to consume, they offer sanctuary. They no longer shout. They speak, "I am here, I see you, and I no longer need you to make me whole." Your eyes, chosen one, have become sacred ground, and that is why people linger when they meet them. There was a time, chosen one, when your voice chased approval, when it filled silence with empty phrases, rushed opinions, or calculated jokes, anything to avoid discomfort. You spoke quickly, often louder than needed, hoping your words would land somewhere useful, somewhere validating. But underneath that noise, you were unsure. not unsure of your intelligence, but unsure of your resonance. You didn't trust that your being alone was enough, so you tried to supplement it with more language, more tone, more cleverness, but it never settled you. Because what your soul craved was not to be heard, it was to be understood. And now that has changed. Because you have dropped beneath the surface of speech, you have found the stillness behind sound. Your voice no longer comes from your mind, it rises from your center. You don't speak to fill space, you speak to anchor it. Your words are fewer now, but they weigh more. Because they are not decorations, they are truth. And truth doesn't need to be polished, it simply needs to be owned. This isn't about volume, it's about vibration. You have discovered that your voice isn't just something you use, it's something you carry. And when you carry it from a grounded place, people don't just hear you, they feel you. Especially women. They hear the restraint in your cadence, the gravity in your pauses, the clarity in your no, the wholeness in your yes. You're not trying to control the conversation, you're holding it like a sacred thread. You don't dominate, you invite. And that invitation feels different, it feels safe. Because your voice doesn't ask for permission, it doesn't apologize for its existence. It simply lands, and in that landing, others realize how ungrounded most of their own speech has been. You bring contrast, you bring a reminder. Your voice is not just communication, it is direction. Not by barking orders or flaunting knowledge, but by embodying inner order. And the more inner order you hold, the more magnetic your words become. You've also stopped interrupting your silence with noise. You've learned that not every moment needs to be narrated, that not every thought needs to be spoken, that not every silence needs to be avoided. And so your voice becomes more potent, not just in what it says, but in when it chooses to say nothing at all. This is why your presence now leads, even in rooms filled with louder men. Because power doesn't shout, power simply is. Women feel that power. Not as pressure, but as depth. When you speak to her, she doesn't feel maneuvered, she feels met. Your voice doesn't seek to seduce, it seeks to reveal. And what it reveals is the rarest thing of all, a man who has learned to speak from a place of knowing, not from a need to be known. Chosen one, your voice has become an extension of your soul. May it always remind others and yourself that true strength is not in what you say, it's in who you are when you say it. Chosen one, you no longer walk into a room the way you once did. Your arrival is not loud, but it is felt. Not because of some performance or demand for recognition, but because your energy speaks before you do, and it says, I am grounded. I am whole. I am not in search of approval. This kind of presence is not taught. It is earned, in silence, in solitude, in the furnace of discipline. You have forged an aura that does not chase, that does not shrink, and that does not sway with every opinion in the air. You've become a man who walks with still power, an energy so dense with inner life that others can't help but notice even if they don't know why. Still power is not passivity. It is consciousness. You've stopped trying to be everything for everyone. You no longer shapeshift to win favor or dilute yourself to avoid rejection. You walk with the confidence of a man who has faced himself and lived to tell the story. The wounds you once hid behind noise have become the quiet fuel of your grace. You do not need to dominate, because your mere presence now carries a weight that outlasts bravado. You don't lean forward in desperation, you lean back in sovereignty. This energy confuses those who rely on control to feel secure. It dismantles those who expect performance as proof of manhood. Your stillness becomes a mirror, and many find it confronting, because your calm forces them to feel their chaos. Your poise reveals their anxiety. Your contentment exposes their hunger. But for those ready to breathe, your presence becomes a sanctuary, especially for women, because they encounter in you something rare, masculine peace without retreat, and masculine strength without aggression. They feel your quiet discipline. They sense your restraint, not as absence, but as focus. They intuitively recognize that you are not available to everything, and that fact alone makes your energy rare. You do not pursue, you attract. But not because you play games. You attract because you are anchored. You attract because your energy does not leak. You attract because you carry an inner fire that no longer needs to be flaunted. You live lit from within, and that flame glows in your silence, not just your actions. You've become unshakable, not by avoiding conflict, but by confronting your own shadows and no longer fearing what others might think of them. That integrity is now in your posture, in the pace of your breathing, in the pauses between your words. And in this still power, you've become an atmosphere, one that soothes, clarifies, and awakens, not through seduction, not through manipulation, but through presence. Still power is not something you announce. It's something others feel. And when a woman encounters it, she knows she has stepped into something uncommon. A man who is enough for himself and thus cannot be moved by fleeting attention or false validation. That is what makes you transcendent. That is what makes your presence unforgettable. Not because you try, but because you are. You are no longer here to prove you're powerful. You are here to embody it. Chosen one, there was a time when your boundaries were made of fear. When you said no because you were afraid of being consumed. When you said yes out of guilt, obligation, or the need to keep the peace. Your energy was porous, leaking into places that left you depleted and unseen. You wanted to be liked, so you bent. You wanted to be wanted, so you stayed silent. And in doing so, you taught others how to treat a version of you that wasn't even you. But that version no longer exists. Now your boundaries are no longer reactive, they are magnetic. They don't scream or push, they radiate. You don't argue about what's acceptable in your space. You embody it. Your very presence now communicates where your energy begins and ends. Not as a wall, but as a signal. And those who carry clarity will honor it without you needing to explain a thing, because your alignment speaks before your mouth opens. You've realized that boundaries are not about rejection. They are about protection, not of ego, but of essence. You are no longer willing to contort yourself to be more palatable to those who fear their own depth. You are no longer available to relationships that cannot hold your truth. And so your yes means more now, because it is no longer automatic, it is sacred. And your no does not come from anger. It comes from reverence for your time, your purpose, and your peace. This shift has made you magnetic, because people sense they cannot just have you. They must earn your presence, and not through games, but through resonance. You no longer entertain energy that is chaotic, superficial, or manipulative. You have no appetite for drama, even if it once seduced you. Your discipline has weaned you off the need for stimulation, and that has made your inner world still, clean, and powerful. Women can feel this immediately. They know you're not here to chase validation. You are here to share clarity. Your boundaries are now energetic before they are verbal. People feel where they stand with you, even if you never say a word. You do not need to justify what you protect. You do not need to apologize for protecting it. Because the more you protect your alignment, the more potent your presence becomes. You are no longer spread thin. You are concentrated, focused, and that makes you rare. Magnetic boundaries are not armor, they are invitation. They say, if you wish to enter my world, come with truth, come with wholeness, come with respect, because I will meet you with the same. That kind of energy is no longer reactive, it is regal. It moves differently, and those who feel it don't know if they should kneel, flee, or surrender, because they've never met a man who holds his ground with such quiet elegance. You are that man now, chosen one, not because you were born with it, but because you earned it. And that earning cannot be faked, it can only be felt. Chosen one, there was a time when your energy moved in unpredictable tides. You would rise high in passion, only to collapse in exhaustion. You were magnetic in glimpses, but inconsistent in essence. And so, even when you drew others in, you couldn't hold the depth that your heart silently longed for. You mistook intensity for intimacy. You confused attention with connection. And in those patterns, you learned a sacred truth. A man's power is not in how much he can ignite, but in how well he can sustain. You began doing what most men never do. You stopped chasing women and started chasing alignment. You stopped asking, what will make her want me, and started asking, what makes me more me. You turned your gaze inward. You tended to your body, your thoughts, your habits, your voice. You stopped living from the hips up and re-entered your entire being. You let your spirit descend back into the temple of your form. And in doing so, your sexual energy ceased to be scattered. It became current, steady, potent, always flowing, but never flooding. And now, women trust that current. They don't always understand it, but they feel it in their bodies when you enter a room. They feel it in the way you move, in the way you look at them, in the way you speak with a rhythm that honors silence instead of fearing it. They feel it in your consistency, how you don't promise connection only to disappear the next day. They feel it in how present you are, how unshakable, how unaffected by performance or pretense. Your masculine energy doesn't just awaken attraction, it awakens trust. Because it does not spike, it holds. That trust is rare. Most women have known men who could excite but not contain, who could seduce but not protect, who had desire but lacked depth. You have become the antidote to that wound. You do not rush to possess. You remain. You do not escalate to impress. You slow down. And in that slowing down, you create space for her to be real, to feel safe, to breathe. Because your presence doesn't just say, "I want you." It says, "I can hold you." And that difference is everything. She sees in you a man who has outgrown the need to be needed. A man who is full, yet spacious, powerful, yet soft, grounded, yet rising. Your presence calls her out of performance, back into presence. Because you are no longer ruled by lust, you are animated by purpose. Your sexual energy does not erupt, it flows. It is no longer an animal loose in the dark. It is a river carved by discipline, warmed by devotion, and lit from within. You have become a current that she feels, even in your silence. Not because you've learned tricks, but because you have become true. And truth does not seduce, it summons. And that summoning is what she cannot explain. But she knows it's real, because it lives in her bones long after you've walked away. You are not just a man, chosen one. You are masculine presence in motion. You are what she didn't know she was seeking until she stood before it. Now you walk without striving. You speak without reaching. You breathe without effort, and yet the space around you shifts. Chosen one, you have become the man who does not knock on every door, but somehow the doors open. Not because of charm or manipulation, but because your presence has become a silent invitation, a wordless call to the sacred, a vibration that says, "Come as you are, but only if you are true." You do not broadcast your worth, you embody it. And in that embodiment, others feel summoned, not to worship you, but to rise within themselves. Because you no longer carry the energy of a man who seeks attention. You carry the presence of a man who carries awareness. You don't chase beauty, you reflect it. You don't pursue validation, you generate resonance. And in that resonance, women don't just feel attracted, they feel awakened. You've learned that attraction is not created by volume. It is revealed through alignment. It is forged in the quiet fire of a man who has integrated his desire, refined his power, and surrendered his ego. A man whose joy is not in conquest, but in communion. A man whose touch is not just physical, it is spiritual, because he touches with his presence first. And presence, true presence, is unforgettable. You've become the man who can walk away without bitterness, the man who can be alone without shrinking, the man who can say no without anger, yes without need, wait without apology. You've become the man whose energy lingers, not like a shadow, but like a blessing. Because you no longer enter spaces to prove yourself. You enter them to be yourself. And that is what women respond to, not the mask, but the man behind it. They are not hypnotized. They are seen. They are not controlled. They are invited, not to please you, but to meet you in the sacred middle, where truth and power coexist without pressure, where intimacy is not something to be achieved, but something to be remembered. And in that memory, you become more than attractive. You become freeing. You become a reference point for what a real man feels like, not just to the mind or body, but to the soul. So now when you walk into a room, you do not ask, "Will I be chosen?" You simply arrive. Because the choosing is no longer external. The choosing has already happened, within. You chose yourself. You chose discipline. You chose peace. You chose truth over performance, purpose over flattery, sovereignty over seduction. And in doing so, you became the invitation that others feel, but can never quite explain. You are no longer the seeker. You are the signal. Chosen one, your very being has become a prayer others didn't know they were waiting to hear. Remain as you are, silent, powerful, true. The world remembers itself through men like you. You became a source of inspiration to others, not by intention, but simply by living in truth. Friends, colleagues, even new acquaintances noticed the ease with which you navigated life, the confidence in your eyes, the warmth of your smile. They came to you for advice, for comfort, for the grounding presence you offered without even trying. In this way, you became a healer, not of wounds you had not caused, but of the mistaken belief that love must come at the cost of the self. You showed others that it was possible to love and to be loved, fiercely and freely, without surrendering what was sacred within. Even those who once underestimated or misunderstood you could not help but be moved by your transformation. Your ex-lover, if they saw you now, would scarcely recognize the person you had become. But the power you radiated was not for them, or for anyone else's approval. It was the reward for having chosen yourself, over and over, in moments both public and private, easy and excruciating.